image with the recruitment of new singer Paul Di'Anno, who joined the band after a chance encounter with Steve Harris at the Red Lion pub in Leytonstone.
Met up with Steve and that and started talking and that, went round his house. Persuaded me to go down for an interview, like a rehearsal and that, and have a jam. And I'm sitting there trying to sing songs I've got no idea what they are, something by Deep Purple or something. So we done that. I sort of knew the song vaguely, but just sort of hummed it and awed it and went through. And then Steve come round in the Sunday afternoon and sort of said, well, yeah, we tried a few other guys, but you got the job if you want it. And I'm like, well, I don't really give a fuck, to be honest with you. Wasn't that interested, but then I see Steve a bit more, and then we went round his house and we started to write together. And as soon as we started writing, there was something there. I can't really say personally about the rest of the guys in the band, musical influences. I know my own was all punk, yeah. I know Steve likes things like Todd Rundgren and stuff like that. He does like a little bit more of the progressive, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah, but then that would be Steve all over, because he's a bloody great musician, and that will be a challenge to him to play something like that, you know what I mean? It's great, and Maiden is quite a complex band.
Paul Di'Anno was a great front man. He was slightly different to the rest of the band. Steve Harris, for instance, long hair, posing all the time with his bass, etc. Di'Anno had shorter hair. He looked like a punk because he came from that punk background, and he gave him a certain punk energy and attitude. Jeff Barton once described him as a rough-hewn stable boy in terms of his charisma and personality, and that summed him up perfectly. That's what he was. He was a lad from the streets. He was a bit cheeky, he was a bit arrogant, but it was exactly what Maiden needed at the time. Had Bruce Dickinson been fronting the band on the first two albums, I don't think it would have worked, because you needed someone a bit leery, someone who came out of the pub, as it were, and got up on stage to give Maiden their focus at that particular juncture. And that's what Di'Anno did.
While Iron Maiden continued to formulate both their lineup and their sound, a number of significant developments occurred in the heavy metal scene. The genre began to emerge from under the shadow of punk, and essential to this was the tireless work of DJ Neil Kay and his tenure at a North London club night that came to be known as the Soundhouse.
I was out of work. I'd been sacked from all the clubs I'd worked in London, and I was delivering furniture for a living out of a big old Pantech, you know, around London, and enjoying life outside of rock and roll, you know. My trucking buddy takes me to this gaff one night and buys me a beer, and he says, look, this place you're going to love. And it was a Wednesday night, and it was a rock night, and they had the biggest sound system I'd ever seen at the time. And the night was wonderful. I remember Peter Frampton being played and stuff like that, you know. Suddenly, halfway through the night, there's an announcement. The guys on stage are asking if anybody in the house fancies coming up on stage and trying out as a DJ, because they desperately needed a rock presenter. And I just thought, I can't turn this down. I've done all this time in the London clubs, I've been in West Berlin, I've done everything, and rock is my life, you know, and it was. I loved motorcycles, I loved the lifestyle, and I went up and did an audition and got the gig there and then, and that's how I arrived at the bandwagon.
There's always people that will get up and do something. Neil Kay in the Soundhouse, you know, he had the balls to get up and do it. In that sort of musical climate, somebody like Neil Kay wasn't so much a visionary as somebody that was just a stand-bearer, someone who was prepared to stand up for what he believed in.
Although the Soundhouse began life as a Wednesday night-only disco at the bandwagon, Kay's cause was aided by circumstances outside of his control. The club's management appeared in court after underage drinkers were discovered at their soul nights, and the judge ordered that they could keep their license only if they changed their schedule and scrapped these discos in favour of Kay's metal shows, which tended not to attract young drinkers.
I came out of court laughing. They'd given me 6 nights a week at the Wagon for my own goddamn thing. By default, you know, it's like Christmas come early. And once that happened, there was a lot more interest.
You can't underestimate how important the bandwagon and Neil Kay's Soundhouse was, which was just basically a back room of a pub where Neil would play the music, and everyone would go along and play air guitar or even turn up with cardboard guitars, and, you know, and the bands would turn up, but not just like, you know, like up and coming bands. People like Ted Nugent and April Wine, who were like a really big sort of melodic rock band from Canada in the 70s, would sort of turn up right? And it wasn't even in central London. I mean, these days, if you can't go sort of like 10 yards from Oxford Circus tube station, no one gives a shit. They travel all the way out to Kingsbury. Kingsbury. It was very, very important, and it worked. And although I'm sure heavy metal would have developed its own way anyway, had Neil Kay not been there, he's still incredibly important in that sort of unifying bit between the band and the kid that bought the record.
As Kay was working to bring hard rock and heavy metal fans together, the scene itself was continuing to grow. 1977 saw the formation in Sheffield of another of the scene's major figureheads, Def Leppard. The following year in Whitley Bay, guitarist Rob Weir quit his band Trick and formed the Tigers of Pantang. As the punk movement began to lose some of its momentum all across the country, new metal bands were surfacing.
After Trick finished, I put an advert in, actually the Newcastle University, for a bass player and a drummer, and I thought I'll start, start again, as it were. And Rocky replied to the advert, and Rocky and I became friends. And Rocky, along the course of a very short time, said, "Listen, I've got a friend who I'm on a college course with, called Brian, and he plays drums. And what about we get him down and the three of us have a go at it." And Rocky and I started to go to shows together, and we had a great love of a band called Rush, who were obviously like one of the first sort of power three-piece, hard rock three-piece bands. I remember standing in the front row of a very, very early Rush tour, and these guys came on, and Rocky and I just looked at it and said, this is tremendous. We've got to do this. We set about creating that. I sort of sat in my bedroom like a mad professor, churning out these riffs and stuff, and bringing them to the rehearsal room, and we would form them and knock them out, and Rocky would put his bass lines to them, and Brian would put his grooves to them, and off we went. And then we decided, we wanted to play live.
Although there were now a number of young metal bands stepping out and performing live, the scene was still not being publicised, and the bands themselves were existing on local circuits, mostly unaware that they were in fact part of a wider national movement.
Bands tended to play in their own area because it was safe, and they knew that they had their sort of safe network of fans. Iron Maiden tended to play in London, Leopard tended to play the Midlands, we tended to play up here, Saxon would play Sheffield, Barnsley, Doncaster, Rochdale. Everybody sort of played in their own areas, and occasionally, you went out of your safe zone. And you got in your van and you drove, and you got a show somewhere else. As indeed we did some shows on Def Leppard's sort of home ground.
1978 would be a big year for the burgeoning movement. Hard rock was returning to the mainstream, with Judas Priest's album Stained Class hitting the top 30 in the UK. And despite the possibilities for media exposure being all but non-existent for rock acts, Motorhead did manage to break through with an appearance on Top of the Pops. At the same time, the Soundhouse's reputation within the metal community was growing, and Neil Kay was soon receiving a wealth of demo tapes from up-and-coming bands. Yet it would remain relatively unknown to the music world at large until a young journalist from Sounds magazine called Jeff Barton paid the bandwagon a visit and almost inadvertently helped coin the phrase that would take the movement to a higher plateau.
Neil Kay called me up and said we've got this really thriving rock club here. We've got a load of serious headbangers, headbanging to music that you will like. And strange as it may seem, the concept of a rock club, full of long-haired oiks, getting their rocks off to